There are moments in a man's life that don't announce themselves. They don't come with warnings or sirens or that slow dramatic music that plays in movies right before the hero does something stupid and brave. They come quiet. They come in the middle of the night, or on an ordinary Tuesday, or on a cold docking platform on the edge of a moon that doesn't even have a proper name yet, just a catalog number and a blinking yellow light that keeps flickering because nobody's bothered to fix it for 3 years. That's where I was when it happened. My name is Cale Marsh. I'm a salvage engineer. And before you imagine something exciting, before you picture a rugged guy with a jetpack and a plasma cutter, zooming through asteroid fields and outsmarting pirates, let me correct that image right now. Salvage work in the outer belt is mostly paperwork, waiting and trying to convince ancient machinery not to fall apart while you're still attached to it. It smells like hydraulic fluid and old socks. The coffee is always terrible. Nobody writes songs about it. I was 29 years old. I had a contract with a mid-tier hauling company called Veritas Deep Logistics, which is the kind of name a company gives itself when it wants to sound important, but doesn't have the budget to actually be important. My ship was a Kestrel-class work hauler named the Groundwater. Don't ask me why someone named a space vessel after underground hydrology. I didn't pick it. And my crew consisted of me, an AI navigation system I'd nicknamed PIP, and a rotating cast of temporary laborers who usually quit after the second month when they realized outer belt salvage was nothing like the recruitment vid promised. I was on Ganymede Station Foxtrot, not the main Ganymede settlement, the real one, with restaurants and parks and actual gravity. This was a secondary outpost, a fuel depot and maintenance bay that sat at the edge of nothing and was mostly used by ships that had no other options. The kind of place where you came when you had to, not when you wanted to. I'd been waiting 3 days for a replacement coupling assembly for the Groundwater's secondary thruster. 3 days of bad food, a bunk that smelled like someone had marinated it in despair, and the flickering yellow light outside the docking window that I could see from my cot. 3 days. That's when I found her. It was past midnight station time. I couldn't sleep. The coupling assembly news had gotten worse, not better. The parts had been rerouted to a military contract and I was now looking at a week minimum, so I'd gone for a walk. Not because I had anywhere to go, just to move. Just to be in motion because standing still made the walls feel closer. Foxtrot Station's lower maintenance corridor isn't a place people go voluntarily. It's where the station keeps its water reclamation units, its thermal exchange pipes, and its 4 decades of accumulated junk that nobody wanted to move but nobody wanted to throw away either. Long hallways lit by amber strip lighting, pipes that hiss, the occasional distant clang of metal cooling or contracting. I was walking past Bay 7, a decommissioned docking lock that hadn't had a ship in it for at least 2 years, when I heard something. Not a clang, not a hiss. Breathing. Wrong kind of breathing. Wet. Labored. The kind of breathing that has effort in it. The kind you hear from someone who is working very, very hard just to keep doing the one thing every living body needs to do. I stopped. I stood there in that amber-lit corridor for a moment, doing the mental calculation that every sensible person does in a situation like that. This is not my business, I should keep walking. This is someone else's problem. I have my own problems, the coupling assembly, the week-long wait, my credit balance. Then I heard it again. And I turned around and went into Bay 7. She was in the corner behind a stack of decommissioned thermal panels. I almost didn't see her. Whatever species she was, her natural coloration was close to the gray-green of the panels, not exactly, but close enough that in the amber light, with her curled tight the way she was, she registered first as a shadow. A bundle of pipes. Something that didn't quite belong but didn't announce itself either. Then she moved, and I saw the eye. One eye large, dark, with a faint internal luminescence that was very slowly dimming, like a lamp running out of power. blinking at me. I'd dealt with aliens before. You can't work the outer belt without dealing with aliens. The Galactic Cooperative had been humanity's uncomfortable reality for 11 years now. We'd met 7 sapient species in a 14-month period, which remains the most disorienting stretch of history I've ever read about. And that includes the century humanity spent trying to figure out what the internet was supposed to be for. But I'd never seen this species before. I thought of her as she immediately, though I had no way to know, just something in the configuration, was perhaps 1.5 meters long if she were stretched out. But she was curled. Her body had a segmented quality to it, not insectoid exactly, more like something between that and the kind of flexible vertebrate structure you'd see in a large deep-sea creature. Her limbs were tucked close. She had what I could only describe as hands, though they had 7 fingers each and were built differently from mine, longer, the joints oriented in unexpected directions. Her surface wasn't skin the way I think of skin, closer to scaled but fine scales, almost iridescent when the light caught them right, mostly gray-green. There were patterns on her, stripes or markings that I could see were probably vivid in full lighting, but they were pale now, faded. That was the worst part, the fading. Even without knowing anything about her species, something in me recognized it as wrong. The color was draining out of her, slowly, steadily, like watching a photograph develop in reverse. She was dying. "Hey," I said, which is not, in retrospect, the most heroic opening line, but I'm a salvage engineer, not a diplomat. The eye focused on me. It took a moment. You could see the effort it took just to redirect her gaze, and when it landed on me, I had this sudden, vivid sense of being evaluated, of a consciousness behind that fading glow, taking me in, deciding what I was, whether I mattered. I crouched down slowly, made myself small, tried to look non-threatening, which is something I'm not entirely sure I know how to do, but I tried. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. "I just heard you breathing." No response, but the eye didn't look away. "Are you injured? Can you communicate?" A long pause. Then very slowly, a sound came from her, not speech exactly, something below speech, a low vibration that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. And then, thin and uncertain and badly accented, with a vocoder translated flatness that told me it was a translation device of some kind doing the heavy lifting. "Human, you should leave." "Yeah, probably," I said. "What happened to you?" Another pause. The eye blinked. It was a slow blink, both lids moving, which was somehow the most exhausting-looking thing I'd ever seen. "Crew abandoned ship. Emergency jettison. My pod malfunction on impact. I have been here." A long pause. The translation device seemed to struggle. "8 of your station rotations." 8 days. She'd been behind those thermal panels for 8 days. "Are you getting air?" I asked. "Your atmosphere is close enough. Not comfortable, but I can metabolize." "Water, food?" "No." 8 days. No food, no water, injured from the pod impact, in a decommissioned bay that nobody checked. 8 days. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to get help." "Do not." I stopped. "Why not?" "I am Veilthrin." She said it like it should mean something. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't know everything it meant. I've learned more since. But something in her tone told me it was either a species name, a rank, or something that in her culture explained why getting help was dangerous. "If station authority finds me here, if cooperative security finds me here, there are." The vibration in her voice got worse. The effort of speaking was costing her. "There are parties who would prefer I did not survive." I sat there in the amber light of Bay 7, looking at this dying alien who was asking me not to get help, and I thought, yeah, this is going to be one of those situations. I went back to my ship. I want to be clear that I thought about just going back to my bunk. I genuinely considered it. I weighed my options. I am not naturally a heroic person. I am a practical person, and practically speaking, getting involved with a dying alien who had apparently survived some kind of assassination attempt or factional conflict was not on my list of things to do while waiting for a coupling assembly. But I kept thinking about that slow blink. And I kept thinking, 8 days. She'd been there for 8 days, and nobody had come for her. I got my emergency med kit from the groundwater. The kit was human spec, which meant maybe 40% of it would be useless or actively harmful to a non-human physiology. But there was water. There were nutrient concentrates. There were bandaging materials and basic analgesics and some equipment that might be useful regardless of species. I also grabbed a portable atmospheric analyzer, because I wanted to know what her atmosphere should be versus what she was getting. And then I went back. It took 3 nights. The first night, I just sat with her and figured out what she could tolerate from my kit. The water was fine. The nutrient concentrates, I had to test one at a time. Some she could process. Some made the markings on her body pulse in a way that I learned to read as pain. We went slowly. She told me her translation device was running low on power and she didn't know when it would fail. She told me her species name. I can't reproduce the sound, it's below human range in its bass tones, but the cooperative translation register calls them the Veil. I'd heard of them. Most humans had heard of them by that point. The Veil were one of the founding species of the Galactic Cooperative. Old, quiet, not particularly warlike, known for something that translated roughly as deep observation. I didn't know much more than that. I found out more that first night. She was not just Veil. She was something specific within Veil society that took a long time to translate, and even with the translation device, I'm not sure I fully understood it. The closest analogy I could construct was witness keeper, a role that was part record keeper, part judge, part what we might call an investigative journalist, except with a formal, ancient mandate within their civilization's legal structure. A witness keeper was not supposed to have political allegiances. They were supposed to observe and record events with strict neutrality, and their recordings were admissible in cooperative court structures at the highest level. Her name, approximately translated, was something my vocal apparatus rendered as Sira. She accepted this without complaint. "What were you witnessing?" I asked on the second night. The translation device was weaker but still functional. She thought for a long time before answering. "A transaction between certain cooperative entities and a human industrial consortium. I had documentation that certain species on the Cooperative Security Council had authorized, had participated in, an arrangement that is prohibited under the Third Compact. The Third Compact was the core treaty between humanity and the cooperative. The one that had set the terms of our inclusion. I'd read about it. Everybody had read about it. What kind of arrangement? The kind that, if proven, would require the removal of 3 senior cooperative council members, and the renegotiation of human membership terms substantially in humanity's favor. I let that sit for a moment. And someone found out you had this documentation. My ship was intercepted 4 days after I transmitted the preliminary archive to a secure location. The crew was told it was a mechanical failure. Emergency jettison was ordered. My pod was misdirected. Yeah, someone had misdirected her escape pod into a decommissioned bay on a forgotten fuel depot on the edge of Ganymede, where she'd been supposed to die quietly in the dark. I looked at her for a long moment. "Where's the archive?" I asked. "Secure, I am the key. Without my biometric authorization, it remains encrypted. If I die, the access sequence is lost for your equivalent of 50 years, long enough for the evidence to be irrelevant." "So they're not looking for the archive," I said slowly. "They're just making sure you don't survive to access it." "Correct." I nodded. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there in the amber light, and I listened to her breathing, which was better than it had been 2 days ago, still labored, but better. And I thought about what it meant to be the key to something that could reshape the political structure of an interstellar civilization. Then I thought about my coupling assembly. And I made a decision. The third night, I moved her. This was the hardest part. She couldn't walk. The pod impact had damaged something in her lower body, and while it wasn't what I'd call a break in human terms, it functioned like one. Moving her required a cargo sled, 3 EVA blankets, and more careful maneuvering than I'd done since my first year on the job when I'd been moving fragile sensor array components through a microgravity field. I got her onto the groundwater at 3:40 station time. The loading ramp was on the far side of the docking level from the maintenance office, and I'd timed it for the shift change window when the cameras on that side typically glitched for 90 seconds due to a power routing issue that the station had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Turns out every old station has its little rhythms if you pay attention long enough. I'd been paying attention for 3 days. I put her in the cargo hold. Not the best accommodations, but the cargo hold had its own atmospheric controls. I'd adjusted the mix based on what the analyzer had told me she preferred, and it was warm, and it was enclosed, and nobody had any reason to go in there. Then I went to the parts desk and told them I didn't need the coupling assembly anymore. The desk clerk looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You've been waiting 4 days," she said. "Change of plans," I said. "I found an alternative." I hadn't found an alternative. The thruster was still running at 60% capacity. I was about to take a ship with a 60% thruster into deep belt space, with a dying alien in my cargo hold, who was apparently carrying evidence of an interstellar political scandal. This is the part where I should have reconsidered. I didn't. We were 6 hours out from Foxtrot Station when Pip flagged an anomaly on the long-range sensors. "2 vessels," Pip said. Pip's voice was a calm, gender-neutral baritone that I'd chosen because it was the one that made me feel least like I was being managed. "Classified as cooperative security class, moving on an intercept trajectory." I looked at the data. "They're fast." "Faster than us, certainly at our current thruster capacity," Pip confirmed. "At present speed differential, they will be within weapons range in approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. I went to the cargo hold. Sierra was awake. Her coloring was still pale, she was nowhere near recovered, but the eye that tracked me when I came in was steadier than it had been. The glow was back a little. Dim, but there. 2 cooperative security vessels," I told her, "gaining on us. What do I need to know?" She was quiet for a moment. The translation device hummed softly. "They will not hail you first." "How confident are you in that?" "They did not hail my ship before they intercepted it." "Right. What about your secure archive?" I said. "If they catch us, if I hand you over, is there any way to still get the evidence out?" "No. If I am taken, they will ensure I do not survive long enough to be questioned. The archive access requires not merely my biometrics but my active authorization. I must be coherent, voluntary, uncoerced." I thought about that. "Pip," I said, "what's the nearest location outside standard cooperative security jurisdiction where I could make a secure data transmission?" A pause. "Interesting question. The answer depends significantly on what we classify as standard jurisdiction. The Verath Station Collective operates under a cooperative adjacent but technically independent charter. They're approximately 4.3 hours out on a heading of. Can we make it before the security vessels intercept us?" Another pause, longer. "Not at our current thruster capacity." I went to my engineering bay. The coupling assembly I hadn't replaced sat in its housing, running at 60%. I looked at it for a while. I knew what I was thinking about doing. I also knew that engineers called what I was thinking about doing irresponsible at best and lethally stupid at worst. The coupling was degraded. If I pushed the thruster to full capacity without the replacement, I was looking at anywhere from a minor cascade failure to an explosion that would depressurize the engineering bay, possibly the entire aft section. I also knew the specific failure mode of this particular coupling variant better than anyone else on this ship, which admittedly was just me and Pip. I knew there was a 15-minute window, maybe 20 if I was lucky, where you could push full capacity before the thermal buildup reached the failure threshold. 20 minutes at full thrust would buy us something, not enough, but something. Pip, I said, I'm going to need you to calculate the exact moment to execute a full thrust burn that gives us maximum velocity change while I manually cool the coupling housing. Tell me when. I would like to note, Pip said, that this approach has a non-trivial probability of catastrophic failure. Define non-trivial. Somewhere between 15 and 45%, depending on the current state of the coupling. I don't have sensor data precise enough to narrow it further. Okay. You understand that range includes outcomes where the ship ceases to function. Pip. Yes. Tell me when. I spent 40 minutes with my hands inside the coupling housing. I am not going to pretend this was comfortable or that I was calm. I was not calm. I was running on 3 nights of bad sleep and fear, and something that I think is the cousin of calm, which is the state you reach when you've committed so hard to a course of action that being afraid of it starts to seem like a waste of energy. My hands were in the housing, manually cycling coolant and monitoring the thermal sensors, and Pip was giving me updates every 30 seconds, and somewhere in the cargo hold Sierra was whatever she was doing, and behind us 2 cooperative security vessels were closing the gap. Optimal burn window in 4 minutes, Pip said. Copy. I should mention that the security vessels have altered course slightly. They appear to have detected our thruster activity. Are they accelerating? Yes, it appears so. Okay, burn window in 4 minutes, got it. The coupling housing smelled like burning plastic, not a good sign. 3 minutes. The plastic smell got worse. One of my secondary sensors started reading yellow. I adjusted the coolant flow manually, which is not something you're supposed to be able to do manually, but there's a workaround that exists because of a design flaw in the Kestrel-class housing that I discovered about 2 years into flying this ship. I'd never been glad of it until this exact moment. 2 minutes. I heard a sound from the cargo hold, faint through the bulkhead. The low vibration of Sierra's voice, unprompted, not directed at me. I don't know what she was doing. Praying, maybe. Or doing whatever the Veil do in moments when they don't know if they're going to survive. 1 minute. The coolant flow stabilized. The yellow reading crept back toward green, not all the way, but enough. 30 seconds. I would recommend bracing. I'm already bracing. Excellent. Pip. Yes. If this works out, remind me to never do this again. I have low confidence you would heed that reminder, but noted. 10 seconds, Pip said. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The groundwater lurched. I want to describe what full thrust on a compromised coupling feels like from inside the engineering bay, and the honest answer is, it feels like standing inside a bell while someone hits it with a hammer. Everything vibrated. The housing screamed. I had both hands on the coolant flow levers and I was fighting them because the thrust was trying to rattle everything loose, and the thermal readout spiked immediately, just spiked straight into the red, and I yanked the coolant wide open and held it there. 15 minutes. I needed 15 minutes. Vessel separation increasing, Pip reported, his voice entirely steady, which I both appreciated and found slightly infuriating. Security vessels are adjusting course. They appear to be, yes, they're accelerating again, but we have opened a meaningful gap. Time to Verith intercept. Approximately 16 minutes at current velocity. Thermal readout was deep in the red. The housing was screaming. The coupling was not going to survive much longer. Pip, can we coast the last 2 minutes? Calculating. Yes. If we cut thrust at 14 minutes, our existing velocity should carry us within hailing range. The security vessels will be close, approximately 40,000 kilometers, but outside immediate weapons range for another 7 minutes. That gives us a window. Cut thrust at 14 minutes, I confirmed. On my mark. Ready. I held the coolant levers. The housing screamed. The minutes went by. At minute 12, the primary coolant sensor failed. Not a catastrophic failure. The flow was still happening, but I was flying blind on the thermal monitoring. I had my hand on the housing itself now, through my work glove, feeling for the vibration change that I knew, from years of working with these systems, came just before the threshold. A specific high-frequency rattle that meant you had maybe 90 seconds before the failure cascade began. Minute 13. The rattle started. Pip, I said, cut thrust now. We're at 13 minutes end. Now, Pip. The thrust cut. The vibration dropped. The rattle faded. The housing was hot, much hotter than I'd ever felt it, hot through my glove but holding. We were coasting. Velocity sufficient for Verath approach, Pip confirmed. Well done. How long until the security vessels are in weapons range? Approximately 9 minutes now. They are continuing to accelerate. Get me Verath station on comms. Civilian frequency, not cooperative official. And while you're doing that, get Sira. Sira. The alien in my cargo hold. A pause, the one you mentioned nothing about. That's the one. Sira came to the bridge. I don't know how she got there. The coupling between her movement capability and my understanding of her biology was still incomplete. She half moved, half dragged herself, and I saw what it cost her, the way her markings went flat with effort. I helped her the last 3 meters. She settled against the co-pilot station, which she was too large for in the conventional sense, but she made it work. Verath station is on comms, Pip said. I have a senior charter officer. She seems impatient. Put her through. The voice that came through was human, older, with an accent I couldn't quite place, and she did, in fact, sound impatient. Unregistered approach vessel. This is Verath Station Charter Authority. You are on an unauthorized trajectory. Identify yourself and state purpose immediately or... My name is Cale Marsh, I said. Salvage engineer, license GX 7741 Marsh, registered to Veritas Deep Logistics. I have a Vale witness keeper aboard my ship who has been the target of an attempted assassination and who is carrying evidence of a violation of the Third Compact by sitting members of the Galactic Cooperative Security Council. A very long silence. Say that again. I said it again. Another silence. Can the witness keeper verify identity? I looked at Sira. She leaned toward the comm and made a sound that was not for my vocal range, and then the translation device rendered something in a sequence that I assumed was her formal identity code within Vale witness keeper records. The silence this time was shorter. Clear approach, Cale Marsh. Emergency priority docking. And whoever is behind you, you should know that Verath Station is filing a formal observation notice with the full cooperative press archive right now. Every journalist in 3 systems is going to have a sensor feed of whatever happens in the next 10 minutes. The cooperative security vessels slowed down. They didn't stop, but they slowed down. And we coasted into Verath Station with 43 seconds to spare. Part 2, the testimony. I want to talk about what it's like to be nobody in the middle of something enormous. Because that's what the next 2 months were. I was nobody, a salvage engineer with a company-issued work hauler and a coupling assembly problem, sitting in the middle of something that turned out to be enormous in ways I hadn't fully understood when I made the decision to go back to Bay 7. Varath Station was technically independent, but it had connections, a lot of connections. The charter officer who'd cleared our approach, a woman named Haida Sorn, turned out to have specifically spent 20 years building those connections because Varath's entire business model depended on being a space where official cooperative authority didn't fully reach. Journalists came there, diplomats who needed to talk off the record, researchers working on things certain powers preferred weren't researched. She knew what to do with us. Within 6 hours of docking, Sierra's preliminary archive had been transmitted to 7 secure locations across 3 independent systems. Not the full archive. The full archive still required Sierra's biometric authorization, which required Sierra to be healthy enough to provide it. But enough. Enough to confirm that the archive existed. Enough to name the parties it concerned. Enough to make killing Sierra a political catastrophe rather than an assassination. The 2 cooperative security vessels loitered outside Varath's jurisdiction for 3 days. Then they left. I watched them go on the long-range sensor feed in the station's common room, with a cup of coffee, surprisingly good coffee, by the way, far better than Foxtrot, and I felt something that took me a while to identify. I think it was relief. But it was also the strange, flat feeling that comes after adrenaline, when the thing that was chasing you is gone and your body hasn't quite figured out what to do next. When the crisis that was using every piece of you is over, and suddenly you're just a person again, sitting in a room, holding a cup of coffee. A salvage engineer, waiting for a coupling assembly. Sierra was being cared for by a medical team that Haida Sorn had assembled from 3 species practitioners. The injuries from the pod impact were real, some of them worse than I'd understood, because veil physiology is not something I could fully assess with a human med kit and a lot of careful guessing. But she was alive. On the 4th day, she asked to see me. They'd set up her recovery space in a room with adjusted atmospheric conditions and lighting that was dimmer and more blue-green than what humans prefer. When I came in, she was more upright than I'd ever seen her, not fully, but getting there, and her coloring was back. That was what got me, the coloring. In the amber light of Bay 7, half dead behind those thermal panels, she'd been gray-green and fading. Now, in the right light with 3 days of care and fluids and correct nutrition, the markings on her body were vivid. Deep blue-green with streaks of something close to gold. The eye that tracked me when I came in glowed steadily, not fading, and it was a color I can only describe as the particular blue of deep water when sunlight hits it at an angle. She was beautiful, which I immediately filed away as an observation to not dwell on, because it seemed like the kind of thought that led to complicated places. Kale Marsh, she said. The translation device was fully charged now and the rendering was cleaner, less flat. How are you feeling? I asked. Better than I have any right to be, she said, given the circumstances. A pause. I want to thank you. You don't have to. I want to, she said, and there was something in the way she said it, quietly, without performative weight, that made me stop trying to wave it off. I have been thinking about what you risked. You knew nothing of me. You knew nothing of what I carried. You heard breathing in a corridor and you turned back. I didn't say anything. Why? She asked. I thought about it. I thought about it for longer than you might expect, because I wanted to give her an honest answer rather than a polished one. 8 days, I said finally. You'd been there for 8 days. That was just wrong. That was just a wrong thing, and I stopped. I don't have a better answer than that. It was just wrong. She was quiet for a moment. The glow in her eyes shifted slightly in a way I couldn't read. Among my people, she said, there is a concept. It translates badly. The closest your language offers is something like the obligation of presence, the idea that witnessing something and choosing not to act is itself an action, a choice, a moral weight. We have something like that too, I said. A lot of our oldest philosophies do. Yes, she said. I think perhaps some things are common across quite different minds. A pause. I would like to tell you what the archive contains, what you helped preserve. You don't have to. I want to, she said again. So she told me. I'm not going to recount all of it. Not because I don't remember, I remember every word, but because the legal proceedings that followed were extensive and public, and the details are part of the historical record now. You can look them up. What I'll say is this. What Sierra had witnessed and documented was the kind of thing that, when it comes out, makes everyone feel slightly sick. Not because it's shocking in the way that violence is shocking. More in the way that betrayal is shocking. The particular nausea of learning that people in positions of trust had spent years telling one story in public, while doing something entirely different in private. 3 cooperative Security Council members, 2 human corporate entities, an arrangement that had systematically distorted the trade access terms that human explorers and settlers in the outer belt operated under, in ways that enriched certain parties and impoverished certain others. Nothing catastrophic, nothing with a body count, not directly. The kind of corruption that's easy to call minor, until you trace its effects through a decade of economic decisions and realize how many real people, working in how many real outer belt installations, had been operating at a disadvantage because someone had quietly tilted the playing field. People like me, actually. I hadn't connected that until she explained it. Verita's deep logistics. The contract terms I'd always found frustrating. The coupling assembly I couldn't get because it had been rerouted to a military contract that existed because of exactly the kind of procurement distortion Sierra's archive documented. I sat very still when I understood that. You've been doing this for 20 years, I asked. Yes, Sierra said. Witnessing things, documenting things, testifying in cooperative proceedings. It is what I am trained for, what I am called to. How many times have people tried to kill you? A long pause. This is the 4th time, she said. I did not have a response to that. I just looked at her, in that blue-green light, and I thought about the particular kind of courage it takes to keep doing a thing that has nearly killed you 4 times, that you do not do for personal gain, but because you believe the record matters, because you believe the truth of events has a weight that outlasts the individual people who witness them. Cale Marsh, she said. Yeah. You also saved something larger than you knew. I know that now. Does it change anything for you? I thought about it. No, I said. I think if I'd known ahead of time the scope of it, I might have been afraid in a different way, a bigger way. It might have made me hesitate. I paused. I think sometimes it's better to make the right decision for small reasons. She looked at me for a long time with that steady, deep-water glow. Yes, she said, I think you are correct. The formal archive transmission took another 3 weeks. Sierra had to recover enough to provide the biometric authorization, fully conscious, coherent, uncoerced, as she told me. The medical team tracked her recovery carefully. I visited every day, partly because I had nothing else to do and partly because, I want to be honest, because I wanted to. Because the conversations were interesting in the way that conversations rarely are. Pip, who had access to my logs, eventually observed, "You have now spent more time in the medical wing than in the groundwater's engineering bay." The engineering bay is fine, I said. The coupling assembly situation remains unresolved. I know. I am merely noting it. Noted. You seem significantly less bothered by the coupling assembly than you were 2 weeks ago. Things change, I said. Pip was quiet for a moment. I see, Pip said, with the tone of an AI that has processed several things simultaneously and is being tactful about the conclusions. During those 3 weeks, the story had begun to leak, not the full archive that was still locked. But Haida Sorn's protection strategy had worked. 7 secure locations had the preliminary documentation, and journalists had begun to piece together what it implied. There were questions being asked in cooperative forums. Security Council members were issuing statements. Certain human corporate spokespeople were suddenly very unavailable for comment. The 2 cooperative security vessels that had followed us were tracked to a Security Council authorization that was now under investigation. Things were moving, and I was on a station waiting for a coupling assembly and visiting a recovering alien, and trying to figure out what any of this meant for my actual life, which was still just salvage work and bad coffee. Except the coffee at Verath was genuinely good. The day Sira was cleared by the medical team, she asked me to be present for the archive authorization. It happened in a secure room with shielded transmitters, a full cooperative observer corps that Haida Sorn had assembled from multiple species to ensure no one party could later contest the process, and 3 independent data authentication systems running simultaneously. Sira stood for the first time in front of me. She was tall, actually, taller than I'd realized in all the time I'd known her as a creature curled in corners or propped against things for support. Her full height was something close to 2 meters, and in the correct lighting, in the color she was meant to be in, she was formidable in a way that had nothing to do with physical threat and everything to do with the kind of presence that certain people carry, the sense of someone who has seen a great deal and processed it, and is at peace with that knowledge. She placed her hands, those 7-fingered hands, the joints oriented in their unexpected directions, on the authentication surface. And she authorized the archive. The transmission took 40 seconds. 40 seconds for 20 years of witness-kept records to propagate across 7 independent secure locations in 3 star systems, simultaneously, irreversibly. Then it was done. There was a silence in the room. I don't know if I expected something dramatic to happen, light from the heavens or a sound, something to mark the moment, but it was just a silence, and then the sounds of the authentication systems completing their verification, and then the cooperative observers began speaking quietly to each other in several languages at once. Sira turned to me. "It is done," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Thank you," she said. "For the 3rd time, I will try to stop saying it." "You can say it as many times as you want," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached out and placed one of her hands on my arm. Not in a human way, not quite, but in the deliberate, specific way that meant contact was intentional. The way you touch someone, when the word you need doesn't exist in the language you share. "I have witnesses often," she said. "Things that matter, events, facts, I preserve them. But this is the first time someone of any species has turned around in a corridor and witnessed me." I didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she needed one. 6 months. That's how long it took. 6 months from the archive transmission to the formal cooperative hearing. 6 months of legal proceedings and testimony and counter-testimony, and the kind of slow, grinding institutional process that exists in every civilization that has decided to try to govern itself through law rather than force. I wasn't there for most of it. I was back at work. I'd gotten the coupling assembly replaced. Verath had a parts distributor with excellent stock, and the groundwater was running at full capacity for the first time in months. I had contracts to fulfill, salvage work in the Middle Belt, a repair job on a relay station in Sector 14, the ordinary rhythms of the job that had been my life for 7 years. Sira and I kept in contact. Not constant contact. She was moving, working, testifying. The witness keeper process had her in multiple locations across the cooperative jurisdiction over those 6 months, and her translation of location into normal human terms was approximate at best. But we talked. I learned more about the Veil in those 6 months than I'd learned in 30 years of reading about the cooperative. Not the official version, the real version. The way their settlements worked, scattered and quiet and built for what she called long observation, the patience of a species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years before humanity had invented writing. The particular philosophy that shaped witness-keeping, which was deeper and stranger than anything in the cooperative's official briefing documents. She learned things about me too, about salvage work, which fascinated her in ways I found surprising, the idea of finding value in what has been abandoned, of understanding broken things well enough to know what they're still good for. She called it a philosophy as much as a trade. You see potential in things that others have written off, she said once, during one of our communications. That's the job, I said. It is not only the job, she said. I didn't argue. The verdict came on a Tuesday. I know because I was in the middle of a salvage assessment on a decommissioned survey vessel when Pip interrupted the work feed. There is a cooperative judicial broadcast you may wish to receive, Pip said. I stopped what I was doing, put it through. The broadcast was formal, the kind of formal that takes 30 seconds of procedural language before getting to the actual information. I waded through it. 3 Cooperative Security Council members removed from office, pending further criminal proceedings. 2 human corporate entities formally censured, and their outer belt trade contracts subject to full review. The economic terms affecting independent human outer belt operators, salvage engineers, prospectors, small haulers, to be renegotiated under a supervised process with direct stakeholder representation. I sat in the middle of the decommissioned survey vessel, and I thought about the coupling assembly I hadn't gotten for 3 days because it had been rerouted, and about all the other salvage engineers and outer belt workers who'd been working against tilted terms for years without knowing why. Then I went back to work. She recalled that evening. I was in the groundwater's small galley, eating rehydrated rice and vegetables, which is not a glamorous meal but is at least consistent. Her face as rendered by the communication system, which did its best with non-human anatomy, appeared on the screen. I heard, I said. I know, she said. I watched your feed when the broadcast came through. You went back to the assessment. I had work. Yes, she paused. The glow in her eye had changed again. It was a warm amber now, rather than the deep blue water color I'd come to associate with her resting state. Kale. Yeah. I am going to say something. I want you to let me finish before you deflect. I put down my fork. Okay. What you did in Bay 7 on the groundwater, the thruster burn with the failing coupling, the transmission to Verath, every moment of that changed things. Not just for me, for a great many people across several species. The 3 council members who were removed controlled appointments and trade decisions that affected shipping routes for 6 species, not only humans. The review of human operator terms in the outer belt, the economic work that comes from the judicial ruling, will benefit people for decades. You did all that, I said. You built the archive over 20 years. You survived 4 assassination attempts. You. Kale. Yeah. Let me finish. I stopped. You could have walked past that corridor, she said. That is the thing that I return to. You could have walked past. Every calculation of personal interest, every reasonable assessment of risk, said to walk past. You had your own problems. You had a coupling assembly and a contract and a company to answer to. And you heard breathing, and you turned around. It was just the right thing to do, I said. Yes, she said. It is remarkable how often people know what the right thing is and find reasons not to do it. You didn't find reasons. I didn't have anything to say to that. I want to tell you something else, she said. Okay. Among the Vale witness keepers specifically, there is a practice. When someone outside the formal structure has served as a de facto witness, When someone has preserved through their actions a truth that would otherwise have been lost, there is a recognition. It is not a title. It is not an official designation. But it is permanent. It is entered into the witness record. She paused. Your name is now in the Vale witness record, she said. Cale Marsh. The account of what you witnessed and what you did. It will be there for as long as the record exists. I sat very still. I stopped, started again. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything, she said. I wanted you to know. 3 months after the verdict, Sierra returned to Foxtrot Station. I know, right? Foxtrot. The fuel depot with the flickering yellow light and the bunk that smelled like despair. She sent me a message that said simply, I am going back to the place where you found me. I want to see it in better light. I changed my route. That's all. I just changed my route, rerouted the groundwater through Foxtrot, which added 2 days to a contract run and cost me a scheduling fee I wasn't delighted about. Pip did not comment on this. I arrived at Foxtrot to find something I had not expected. There were ships at Foxtrot, not just the usual couple of fuel stoppers and my battered work hauler. 7 ships at least. A cooperative diplomatic vessel, actual diplomatic insignia, the kind you don't usually see at a fuel depot. 2 Vale craft that looked nothing like human ships and sat in their docking locks like they'd been grown rather than built, organic curves and no visible seams. A press vessel with the emblem of the Cooperative News Cooperative. A small yacht belonging to someone who could afford a small yacht. The flickering yellow light outside the docking window had been fixed. I walked down to the lower maintenance corridor, Bay 7. There were people there, not a crowd, a gathering. 12 or 15 beings of 4 species standing in that amber-lit corridor. Cooperative officials, Vale observers, journalists. Haida Sorn from Verath Station, who caught my eye across the space and nodded once. And Sierra, standing fully in the middle of Bay 7. In her colors, the blue, green, and gold of her, vivid in a way that the poor lighting of that corridor had never been able to reveal. Her markings were active in a way I'd rarely seen them, shifting slowly like the surface of deep water. She was holding herself at full height. She saw me come in. She said nothing. She just looked at me across that space with the glow in her eye warm and steady. I said nothing either. I walked over and stood next to her, and we both looked at the corner behind the thermal panels, where she'd been for 8 days. Different in better light, she said finally. Yeah, I said, everything is. There was a formal ceremony. There usually is in moments like these. Civilization tends to want to mark things, to put ritual around the moments that matter, to give people a fixed point to return to in memory. The cooperative representative gave a speech. Several speeches, actually. There was a formal recognition of Sierra's 20 years of witness-keeping work, and a citation that I gathered from the translation was one of the highest formal honors in cooperative jurisprudence. There was documentation read aloud in 4 languages. There were recordings being made for the historical archive. And then, at the end, the Vale senior observer, an elder, ancient in the way that beings are ancient when their civilization has been counting years for a very long time, spoke directly to me. The translation came through clear and careful. Cale Marsh, you are not Vale. You are not a witness keeper by training or by oath. You do not hold a formal role within any structure that we would recognize as having authority over these events. A pause. And yet the record holds your name. The truth of what happened here is intact because of a decision you made in a corridor at midnight, for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. This civilization, all our civilizations, are sustained by such moments far more than by our formal structures. The formal structures are the visible thing, but beneath them always are people who heard something wrong in the dark and turned around. He looked at me. On behalf of the Vale people and the Galactic Cooperative, I thank you. I didn't know what to say. I don't think I said anything appropriate. I think I said thank you and then felt immediately stupid about it. Sierra, standing next to me, made a sound very low in her chest that might have been laughter. I couldn't be sure. Part 5. What galactic politics looks like from a work hauler. Here's the thing about being involved in a major cooperative judicial case, from the perspective of a salvage engineer with a company-issued hauler. Life continues. It just continues differently. The renegotiated trade terms for outer belt human operators came into effect 8 months after the verdict. The differences were not dramatic. Nobody got rich overnight. Nobody's life became suddenly easy. But the margin shifted. The contract terms that Veritas Deep Logistics operated under improved enough that they passed some of that improvement to their field engineers, which meant my compensation rate went up by 11%. 11% doesn't sound like a lot. But in the outer belt, where margins are thin and equipment costs are high, and the difference between a profitable run and a break-even run is often smaller than you'd expect, 11% is real. It's the coupling assembly you can buy without waiting 4 days. It's the maintenance window you can afford to take. It's the difference between running hot and running safe. I thought about Sierra when I signed the revised contract, about 20 years of watching, about the patience of it. I also got several job offers. The Cooperative Information Service, the Independent Outer Belt Operators Association, 2 journalism outlets that had covered the case and decided a salvage engineer who'd successfully evaded cooperative security vessels with a failing thruster coupling had an interesting perspective on things. I turned them all down. I like my job. I know that's not a very exciting answer, but I'm good at my job, and there's a particular satisfaction in being good at something physical and practical, in knowing the specific failure modes of a Kestrel-class coupling assembly well enough to use them to your advantage, in finding value in things that have been written off. I thought about what Sierra had said, a philosophy as much as a trade. Pip, approximately 1 year after everything, made an observation. We were in transit between a relay station repair job and a salvage assessment in the middle belt. I was doing routine maintenance. The actual coupling assembly had been replaced properly now, the correct parts installed correctly, running at full capacity with no manual coolant workarounds needed, and Pip said, "You have a message from Sierra." "Yeah, I saw it. I'll read it later." "You typically respond within 2 hours," Pip said. "This one has been waiting 6. "I've been busy." "You have been doing maintenance you could have done during transit time." I put down the calibration tool. "What's your point, Pip?" "I don't have a point," Pip said. "I am observing. I am quite good at it." I looked at the comm screen. The message had been sitting there for 6 hours. It wasn't that I didn't want to read it. It was more complicated than that. Something about the normalcy of the last year, the work, the contracts, the improved margins, the ordinary rhythms of a salvage engineer's life, had made the distance between what I did every day and what Sierra was feel very clear. She was a cooperative witness keeper with 20 years of cross-species legal work and a name in the galactic historical record. I was a person who found broken things and figured out what they were still good for. This seemed, on reflection, like a potentially significant gap. "Read it aloud," I said, "the first line." Pip read, "Kale, I am going to be near Sector 14 next month. I want to know if you have any work in that area." I stared at the comm screen for a moment. Then I picked up the calibration tool and went back to work. "Tell her I have a relay station inspection in Sector 14, I said, "and a salvage assessment 2 days after. Shall I mention whether you have time around those contracts?" "Yes," I said, "tell her I have time around those contracts." Sector 14 is not the most impressive part of the belt. It doesn't have the dramatic quality of the outer reaches, no gaseous giants in view, no particularly striking nebulae. It's mid-range in every sense, mid-distance from major stations, mid-density of traffic, mid-quality of coffee at the one service depot in the area. The relay station inspection took 2 days. It was unremarkable work, which I say with affection. Unremarkable work done competently is its own satisfaction. Sierra's craft arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. Veil ships are something to see up close. The description I gave earlier, grown, not built, still holds. They have a kind of coherence that human-engineered vessels don't, all the structural decisions making sense as parts of a whole rather than as separate systems bolted together. Hers was small for a Veil craft, almost modest, which I'd been told was consistent with the witness-keeper tradition of traveling light and inconspicuously. She came aboard the groundwater for the first time since I'd carried her out of it on a cargo sled a year ago. She stood in the cargo hold, empty now, properly lit, and looked around. "This is where I recovered," she said. "Yes. It's larger than I remembered. You were in a different state last time you saw it." She moved through the ship slowly, looking at things in the way I'd come to understand was the Veil deep observation, not just seeing, but cataloging, understanding, the way you look at something when you're trying to know it rather than just view it. She spent a long time in the engineering bay. She looked at the coupling housing for several minutes. "This is where you spent 14 minutes while we burned," she said. 13 minutes and something, I said. Pip would have the exact count. 13 minutes and 42 seconds, Pip offered. "Thank you, Pip," we both said in approximately the same tone. We looked at each other. "Are you hungry?" I said. "I have. The food is not impressive, but it's sufficient." "Yes," she said, "I am hungry." We ate in the galley. I had the rehydrated rice. Sierra had something she'd brought from her own supplies, which was compact and faintly luminescent in a way I'd stopped finding strange. We talked about the Sector 14 salvage assessment. She'd actually read the preliminary survey report, which surprised me, and she had a question about a specific component I'd flagged as potentially salvageable. She was right that it was more salvageable than I'd noted. She'd seen a similar piece in a cooperative archive and recognized the model. "You know salvage tech," I said. "I know a great many things about a great many things," she said. 20 years of witnessing." "You observe everything." "Everything. Everything that passes through the places I go to." A pause. "Including, occasionally, the way a salvage engineer assesses what has been written off." I looked at my food. "Sierra," I said. "Yes." "What are you doing in Sector 14? "I told you, witness-keeping work in this region." "And is it going to take a specific amount of time, or?" "It is flexible," she said. "Witness-keeping rarely has fixed deadlines." "Right." I looked at the comm panel, then back. "I have 3 more contracts in this region over the next 6 weeks." "I see. If your work is flexible." "It is flexible," she confirmed. "Right." I picked up my fork, put it down. I want to be clear about what I'm." "Kale," she said. "Yeah." I traveled 4.7 light hours to see a relay station inspection. I stopped. "There is no witness-keeping work in Sector 14, she said. "There is nothing of legal significance in this region at all." I checked. I sat with that for a moment. "Okay," I said. "Yes," she said. "So you're here," she said. "I am here."